Greetings, productive programmer. So in this lesson, we're going to explore an important concept that has to do with the efficiency of our code. So we have not really been doing the best practices when it comes to Phoenix, and now it's time to correct that. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean, but it was easier to wait until this point to really solidify and explain the concept. So what we have so far, if we take a look at our code, we have our chat messages being stored inside of a variable called chat messages. And let's take a look at that data structure again really quickly. So I just want to show you in real time. So let me get rid of some of the loggers that are not pertinent to this example. So I'm just deleting a few of my loggers, but I'm keeping the one that's called chat messages. That's inside of our handle info that handles the new messages. And I'm just going to go ahead and show you this in real time. Now, remember that I log these out before we assign the value to them. So it's going to be one behind what gets appended there, but that's not going to affect this lesson. You'll still understand what I mean when I show you it. So I'm going to type out a chat message 1 and hit enter. And then I'm going to type out 2, 3, and then 4. So I typed out 1, 2, 3, and 4. And our chat messages are displaying everything except for the last one, which gets assigned after we logged what the current chat messages were. But we can see messages 1 through 3. So let's go ahead and look at these messages that are stored inside of our chat messages variable. You can see that we have a map that contains the username and the message, and then the second message 2, and then the third message 3. Now, the problem with this, maybe you can see it already, is that every time we send a chat message, we are sending this data back and forth between our socket. And the problem with that is that this is not necessarily the most efficient way that we can pass our code, because now we are storing this data forever. But as a chat application, once we display this on the page, we don't really need to store this in the socket anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our code more efficient, and we're going to make it so that we don't have to store these messages on our socket, and eventually we'll just store the most recent message and communicate that to all the users in the chat room. So let's go ahead and do that here. And all we have to do to set this up, it's really simple. We come into where we mount our page, and we just go ahead and we add a special property called temporary assigns, and we set it to the list of variables that we want to be temporarily assigned in our application. And temporary assign just means that the ones that we want to only track the most recent information of, we don't want to store it long term. So we're just going to temporarily store this data for our chat messages. And we set it up this way. So we just put chat messages as a variable, and we set it up to have that default value of what we want to reset it to. Every time there's a message that comes through, it'll reset it to this structure after it uses the most recent information. And so now what we can do is we can also, in here inside of our handle info, we don't need to keep appending to the list and keep adding more and more data to this chat messages like we just we're demonstrating here on the terminal. So we can just get rid of this, and we can just pass just the message. Now let's head over to our code again and see the situation over there. So now if I say hello and I say world, now we have a problem though. So I can only type one thing at a time now, because we are only storing one value in memory. So how do we solve that? And I just wanted to show you this so you can see there is only one memory stored here, and we are no longer storing multiple things in memory. And you can also see that when you look at our console log and you see that the chat messages is now set to one item. So how do we solve the problem though if we only have one message? And how are users going to really be able to have a conversation with one another? Well, that's the really cool thing about Phoenix LiveView. There is a solution for that. And it's just really simply, Phoenix LiveView will handle appending the new information to our form. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to where we have our message data, And inside of our list here, instead of looping through all of the items here and displaying everything, we are going to go ahead and just append the latest data. And we can do this by setting Phoenix to store anytime there's an update. So we're going to do Phoenix update. What we want to do inside of this unordered list for the chat message that we're going through, whenever there's an update so update is going to check to see anytime that chat messages, the variables inside of this element, it's going to check to see when those are updated. And anytime that this is updated, instead of just looping through and putting everything here, Phoenix update is going to just append them. So we're just going to tell it to append them. Okay, so after we've appended our items to our list, so we still have a loop here, but it's going to be a short loop because we're only storing one item in there. And we're just doing that to maintain the structure here of tracking the chat messages. So we're tracking this variable, and it is a list, so we technically still have to loop through it as a list, even though it's basically just a list of one now. But this is the only change we have to make here. And now our code, if we look at it on Phoenix, it does throw an error, but it throws a very useful and informative error that says that the attribute Phoenix update requires an ID attribute to be set. So the reason that you need to set an ID is because in order for us to append all of these items onto the list, in order for Phoenix to know where to append things and where they belong in the order, it needs to have identification, it needs to have IDs so that it can accurately place things inside the page. So in order to add an ID, it's just as simple as coming into the unordered list and add in an ID and saying that it's chat, we'll call it chat messages, will be the ID of our unordered list. And so Phoenix LiveView needs to have an ID on the element, so that way it can handle all of the complexity on the back end or on its end. And what it will do is it will use that identifier chat messages to know where to put those appends whenever there's an update. So whenever there's a Phoenix update, it'll append, but it needs to have an identification to assist itself with putting those chat messages onto the page. And additionally, into having chat message ID of where you want to append those messages, you also need to have IDs for everything that you are appending, so that way Phoenix will know where to put it. Because right now, if we come back to our application and we just make sure that we save this page, we come back to our application. If I start trying to say something, hey and hello, nothing gets displayed because the items that we're appending, this data from our chat messages here, that data that we're trying to append to this page, well, that's not going to function unless we have IDs, so that way Phoenix knows where to put those in the order that it's appending to the list. So to do that, each one of these lists, just like the unordered list needs an ID, the list items need an ID, and they need to be a unique ID. So if we come into our helper function here for user message heeks, we are going to need to have an ID here. And as I'm sure that you've experienced with HTML and CSS, IDs should be unique and classes can be reused, but IDs should always be unique. So every list item needs to have a unique identifier. So it needs to be a unique identifier. And that means we need to change the structure of data that we send. And we can do this by giving every single one of our message data. So every time there's a message transmitted in the chat, we are going to give it a unique ID, a unique identifier. And I'm going to update in our code this chat message data. So I'm setting it up here in our local function to handle it. And now I'm just going to implement that where we broadcast it. So just like we have the username and the message being added to our message data, let's also add a unique identifier. And then I would recommend using a package here that gives you a unique identifier. But to keep this lesson actually from getting derailed, what I'm going to do is I'll just use our anonymous name generator that generates a random name temporarily to assign kind of a random ID to these. But in the next lesson, I'll show you we should probably use a better package than this. But just to keep this from getting a little bit derailed and having to install a package right away to explain this concept, let's just paste that in there to give our unique identifiers, generate random names for them for now. And so now if we come back to our code and we type in hello, and we type in hi, now they're displaying again as multiple messages. And let's go ahead and display two users side by side, and we'll say hi, and this user can say hey, and we can see that they're chatting in real time again, and these messages are being displayed here. And additionally, if we type a bunch of messages and we go look at our code again, we can see in our code that every time a chat message is created here, it is just simply only putting one inside of there that contains the message and the username and the user ID. So temporary assigns has allowed us to create more efficiency by simply storing one chat message in the socket at any given time, and then simply all users just simply append the latest information to their page, and then they can forget it and they don't have to track it ever again, and then their job is done. So that's what we've done in this lesson. We've set up temporary assigns to make it more efficient, because if we tracked 1 million or 2 million chat messages with even more complex structures than what we set up for our initial map, then we would just have an entire disaster in our socket. We would just have so much stuff being stored in there, and then the size would grow and grow, and that could become troublesome for both the user and for our server. So temporary assigns makes it very, very efficient. So this is a very helpful and useful technique that we can utilize in Phoenix LiveView. And I hope you've enjoyed this lesson and the efficiency gain that we got here. And I'll see you over in the next lesson, where we will replace this unique identifier with a proper package and clean this up.